Death stalked the Texas frontier in 1867, and bounty hunters had finally cornered their prize. Magdalena Cortez, known as the Black Widow for killing 3 abusive husbands, hung tied to a cottonwood tree while giving birth to her daughter. The Akir bounty hunters planned to collect her $500 reward and eliminate any witnesses. When Comanche warriors attacked through the thunderstorm, their war chief Running Bear cut her bonds and claimed both mother and child as his own family. But Magdalena carried more than just a bounty on her head. She carried the power to either save or destroy everyone who dared call her their own. Lightning split the Texas sky like judgment itself. Thunder rolled across the prairie, shaking the cottonwood tree where Magdalena Cortez hung suspended by thick rope. Her wrists burned raw against the bindings. Rain streaked down her face, mixing salt with storm. 9 months of carrying this child had led to this moment. Labor pains tore through her body as she twisted against the bark. The baby was coming, whether death waited below or not. Dutch Garrison sat his horse beneath the tree, rain dripping from his hat brim. His 2 companions shifted restlessly in their saddles. $500 hung above them in human form. Dead or alive, the bounty paid the same. "Nature's doing our work for us," Dutch said. His voice carried no warmth. "Black Widow won't be killing any more husbands after tonight." Magdalena's scream cut through the thunder. The child moved inside her, fighting to enter a world that had already condemned them both. Her torn dress caught the newborn as she pushed with strength born of desperation. The baby's cry pierced the storm. Dutch raised his rifle toward the sound. "Can't have witnesses." The Comanche war cry came from everywhere and nowhere. Arrows whispered through rain-soaked air. Dutch's horse reared as warriors materialized from the darkness, like spirits given flesh. Running Bear led the charge on a paint stallion. His lance found the first bounty hunter before the man could draw his weapon. Stonehawk flanked left, his bow singing death songs in the night. Dutch wheeled his mount toward the tree line. His rifle barked once, wild and high. "This ain't over, woman. I'll be back for what's mine." The hoofbeats faded into thunder. Running Bear dismounted beneath the cottonwood. His knife sliced through Magdalena's bonds with swift precision. She collapsed into his arms, clutching her daughter against her chest. The baby's cries had gentled to soft mewing sounds. Magdalena expected death. The Comanche were not known for mercy toward white settlers. She had heard the stories around campfires. Women taken, children scattered to the wind. Running Bear knelt in the mud beside her. Rain plastered his long hair against his shoulders. He reached toward the baby with calloused fingers, stopping just short of touching her face. "Tehatsi," he whispered. Stonehawk approached, his war paint streaked by. Rain, the other warriors formed a circle around the tree. Their faces held questions that demanded answers. Stonehawk spoke in rapid Comanche. His tone carried challenge and confusion in equal measure. Running Bear responded with words that made every warrior step backward. Whatever he had said carried weight beyond Magdalena's understanding. The fever took her on the second day. Dreams and memories twisted together like smoke from a dying fire. She saw her mother's face bruised and swollen from her father's fists. She remembered the wedding dress that became a funeral shroud. 3 husbands, 3 graves, 3 women who would never again feel the back of a man's hand. The other wives had called her blessed, lucky to have found love so many times. They never knew the truth. Love had nothing to do with it. Each husband had been a monster wearing a man's face. Each death had been justice served with her own hands. The Black Widow reputation grew from whispered stories and courthouse gossip. Better to be feared than to be prey. Mourning Dove tended her through the sickness. Running Bear's sister spoke no English, but her hands knew healing. She brought broth made from prairie herbs and roots. She changed the poultices on Magdalena's torn wrists. She held the baby when fever made holding impossible. On the 3rd day, Magdalena heard the arguing. The tribal council met in Running Bear's lodge. Voices rose and fell like wind through grass. Stonehawk's words carried anger. Running Bear's responses grew shorter and harder. Magdalena understood, enough to know she was the storm's center. Mourning Dove brought her daughter, clean and fed. The baby's eyes were dark as river stones. She would grow up between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Like her mother had always been. "They want me gone." Magdalena's voice came out as a whisper. Mourning Dove nodded. Her English was broken, but clear. "Stonehawk says soldiers come. You bring death to people." The truth settled in. Magdalena's chest like cold iron. Dutch would not forget. He would return with cavalry and rifles and the full weight of a government that wanted every Comanche dead or driven onto reservations. Her rescue had become their doom. That night, she sat by the fire watching flames dance against lodge walls. Her daughter slept in a cradle board made from willow and soft deerskin. Comanche children played quiet games in the shadows. Their mothers watched with eyes that held no welcome. Running, Bear entered without sound. He sat across the fire from her, close enough to see the grief carved into his weathered face, close enough to recognize a fellow survivor of unthinkable loss. "Why?" she asked. He stared into the flames for a long time. When he spoke, his English came slow and careful. "My daughter died in the cold time. Soldiers came to winter camp. She fought to save the small ones." His hands opened and closed like he was trying to hold smoke. "I could not help her." Understanding passed between them without words. They were both haunted by children they could not save, both carrying guilt that ate at their souls like acid. "Your woman brings trouble," Stonehawk said from the lodge entrance. He stepped into the firelight, his face hard as flint. "Dutch garrison scouts for the cavalry. He knows where we winter now." Magdalena felt the trap closing around them all. Every moment of safety had been an illusion. Every kindness would be paid for in blood. Stonehawk looked at Running Bear with something that might have been pity. "Choose, brother. One white woman or all our people." The fire popped and hissed. Shadows danced on lodge walls like spirits waiting for an answer that could never be right. Dawn came gray over the camp. Magdalena woke to her daughter's soft crying and the sound of women working outside the lodge. The familiar rhythm of daily survival that continued regardless of storms or strangers. Mourning Dove entered with steaming tea made from prairie sage. She gestured for Magdalena to drink, then pointed toward the lodge entrance. Time to face the world that questioned her right to exist in it. The women gathered around the central fire pit fell silent when Magdalena approached. Their hands never stopped working, scraping hides, mending moccasins, braiding horsehair into rope. But their eyes tracked her every movement like she carried disease. Only Mourning Dove made space beside her on the worn buffalo hide. She handed Magdalena a bone needle and a strip of leather that needed stitching. Work was the universal language of women who understood survival. The children watched from a distance, curious but cautious. Magdalena had been children once before the world taught her that safety was an illusion and trust a luxury she could not afford. Her daughter fussed in the cradle board. Hungry again. Always hungry. Life demanding sustenance even when death waited at every horizon. The buffalo appeared at midday like a brown mountain moving across the prairie. Old Bull, separated from his herd, scarred and mean from too many battles. He wandered too close to the horse herd, snorting challenges at anything that moved. The warriors reached for their weapons. Hunting party would take time to organize, time they might not have before the bull decided their horses looked like enemies worth charging. Magdalena stood, walked to Running Bear's lodge where her gun belt hung from a lodge pole. The Colt felt familiar in her hand. Weight distributed, just right. Grip worn smooth by years of necessity. She walked toward the buffalo with steady steps. No hurry, no hesitation. The old bull swung his massive head toward her, eyes rolling white with rage. The first shot took him in the shoulder, spun him sideways but did not drop him. He bellowed and charged, hooves throwing up clouds of dust and grass. The second shot found his heart. He stumbled, crashed to his knees, rolled onto his side with a sound like falling timber. Silence settled over the camp. Then voices rose in appreciation. Meat for the fires, hide for winter clothing, bone for tools and weapons. The women looked at her differently now, still wary but with grudging respect. Anyone who could put food in the pot had value. Stonehawk approached while the butchering began. His face revealed nothing, but his posture spoke of a man reassessing his judgment. "You know soldier ways," he said. Not a question. Magdalena wiped blood from her knife blade. "I know how they think, how they move, where they make camp. Dutch garrison leads them. Dutch scouts ahead, finds the target, reports back with numbers and positions." She looked toward the horizon where dust devils danced in the heat. "He knows this country better than most." Stonehawk absorbed this information like a sponge soaking up water. Knowledge meant survival. Survival meant protecting the people who depended on him. That evening, Magdalena sat with the tribal council, the only woman among warriors who had earned their place through courage and wisdom. She felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. Running Bear spread a map drawn on buffalo hide across the ground. Rivers and mountains marked in charcoal and berry juice. X marks where the cavalry had been seen. "They follow a pattern," Magdalena said. 3 days to scout, 2 days to position, 1 day to attack. Stonehawk pointed to a narrow canyon marked on the hide. "Here? Maybe. Dutch likes high ground for observation, cover for retreat." She traced possible routes with her finger. "But he also likes water nearby. Horses need to drink." The warriors murmured among themselves, plans forming, strategies discussed in low voices. Young Crow, barely old enough to carry a man's weapons, leaned forward. "How do we know she speaks truth? White woman could be leading us into trap." Silence stretched taut as bowstring. Magdalena felt the familiar weight of suspicion settling on her shoulders like an old coat. "Because," Running Bear said quietly, "she has nowhere else to go." The truth of it hit like a physical blow. No white settlement would take her in. No town would offer sanctuary to the Black Widow. The bounty on her head made her valuable dead to anyone who might find her. This camp, full of people who barely tolerated her presence, was the only home she had left. 2 days later, Stonehawk returned from scouting with news that settled like lead in everyone's stomach. He dismounted his lathered horse and walked straight to Running Bear's lodge. Magdalena was nursing her daughter when the war chief entered. His face carried the kind of grim satisfaction that came from being proven right about something he wished he had been wrong about. "Dutch offers rifles," he said without preamble. 20 Spencer carbines to any tribe that delivers the Black Widow. The baby stopped nursing. Even she seemed to sense the shift in the air. "Which tribes?" Running Bear asked. "Kiowa are considering. Some of our own young men speak of easy weapons." Stonehawk's eyes found Magdalena's. 20 rifles could change the balance of power, feed families through the winter, protect children from soldiers. The math was simple and brutal. One woman's life against the survival of entire communities. Her death could arm dozens of warriors. Her continued existence threatened everyone who sheltered her. How long before they decide? Running Bear's voice stayed level, but his hands clenched into fists. 3 days. Maybe less. Magdalena looked down at her daughter's face. So small, so trusting. Born into a world that wanted her dead before she had drawn her first breath. "I could leave," she said. "Take her and ride south. Mexico, maybe." "Dutch would follow," Stonehawk replied. "He wants his bounty, and the cavalry wants you as an example to other women who might think to live outside the law." The trap was complete. Stay and bring destruction to the only people who had shown her kindness. Leave and die in the wilderness with her infant daughter. Running Bear stood and walked to the lodge entrance. He stared out at the camp where children played and women worked and men prepared for battles they might not survive. 3 days, he said finally. "We have 3 days to find another way." But Magdalena could see the truth in his shoulders, the weight of impossible choices pressing down like stone. Some problems had no solutions, only consequences that someone had to live with, or die for. The tribal council fire burned low when Running Bear finally spoke the words that had been choking him for months. Warriors sat in a circle, their faces carved from shadow and flame. The weight of approaching cavalry pressed down on them like storm clouds. "I will tell you why I claimed her as Tehatsi," Running Bear said. His voice carried the roughness of a man forcing truth through his throat. "She gave birth in lightning, same storm that took my little dove." Stonehawk leaned forward. The other warriors shifted like grass in wind. "6 moons ago, soldiers came to our winter camp. Little Dove fought to save the small ones when bullets started flying." Running Bear's hands opened and closed around empty air. "She died protecting children who were not her blood." The fire popped. Sparks rose toward stars that seemed too distant to matter. This woman fought the same fight, hung from a tree bleeding but still protecting her child. Running Bear looked across the flames at faces he had known since boyhood. Same spirit. Same heart. Young Crow spoke what others were thinking. "You claim her because she reminds you of the dead? I claim her because I failed the living." The confession hit the circle like a physical blow. Warriors who had followed Running Bear through countless battles suddenly saw him as something else, something broken. Mourning Dove emerged from the shadows at the edge of firelight. Her presence violated council protocol, but grief had its own authority. She walked to her brother's side and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tell them the rest," she said quietly. Running Bear's face crumpled like dried leather. "I was there when Little Dove fell. I saw the soldier raise his rifle. I could have stopped him." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "But I hesitated, 1 heartbeat, maybe 2. His voice dropped to a whisper. "She died because I was afraid." Stonehawk studied his war chief with new understanding. The reckless attacks, the impossible risks, the decisions that endangered the tribe while serving no strategic purpose. All of it made sense now. "You seek death in battle," Stonehawk said. "You think dying will bring her back? I think living with it is worse." Thunder rolled across the prairie without rain. The sound of approaching hoofbeats reached them before the rider appeared. A young warrior from the outer pickets, his horse lathered with sweat and fear. "Soldiers," he gasped. "But only one. He carries a white flag." Dutch Garrison rode into camp like he owned the ground beneath his horse's hooves. His cavalry saber rattled against his stirrup. His uniform bore the dust of hard travel, but his posture spoke of a man who believed himself untouchable. He dismounted near the council fire without invitation. His eyes found Magdalena among the warriors, and his smile held no warmth. "Gentlemen," he said, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Running Bear stood slowly. "The Black Widow claimed sanctuary. We honor that claim." Sanctuary. Dutch tasted the word like it was poison. Interesting choice of words for a woman who murdered 3 husbands in cold blood. "She defended herself," Mourning Dove said. "Women have that right." Dutch's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Rights? Ma'am, that woman is a wanted criminal. $500, dead or alive. That's not a right, that's a bounty." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a rolled paper, unfolded it to reveal Magdalena's face sketched in charcoal. Wanted posters had been circulating through every settlement from Texas to Kansas. "Now I'm prepared to be reasonable," Dutch continued. "Hand her over and I'll tell my commanding officer that this camp was empty when I arrived. Nobody needs to get hurt." Stonehawk stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" Dutch's smile widened. "Well, that would be unfortunate. See, I'm not just a bounty hunter, Chief. I'm a cavalry scout. Been tracking your movements for months, reporting back to Fort Gibson." The words fell like stones into still water. Ripples of understanding spread through the circle. "You led them here," Magdalena said. Her voice carried the flatness of someone recognizing a trap that had been closing for a very long time. "Led them? Lady, I brought them gift-wrapped." Dutcho gestured toward the horizon. 3 companies of cavalry, howitzer cannons, enough firepower to turn this camp into a memory. He pulled out a pocket watch and checked the time with theatrical precision. They'll be here by dawn. Unless, of course, I ride back tonight with news that the Black Widow died resisting arrest. The tribal council looked at each other with the expressions of men who had just learned they were already dead. Every decision, every moment of kindness, every day of shelter had been leading to this moment. You used her as bait, Running Bear said. I used her as opportunity. Amazing how helpful people become when they think they're doing the right thing. Dutch snapped the watch closed. You want to save your people? Give me what I came for. Magdalena stood and walked toward her. Horse. Her movements carried the mechanical precision of someone who had accepted the inevitable. Better to die alone than to watch children burned out of their homes. Stonehawk caught her arm. His grip was gentle but firm. A warrior does not run from the battle they caused, he said. She looked into his eyes and saw something unexpected. Not anger or blame, but a kind of fierce respect. The acknowledgement that some fights were worth having, even when they could not be won. This is my fault, she said. No, Stonehawk replied. This is his choice. He nodded toward Dutch, who was checking his rifle with the casual confidence of a man who had never lost a bet. We fight, Stonehawk announced to the council, not because we can win, but because some things are worth dying for. Dutch shook his head like a teacher disappointed in slow students. You're making a mistake, Chief. I'm offering you a way out. The only mistake, Running Bear said, was believing that men like you could be trusted with mercy. Dutch mounted his horse and gathered the reins. Dawn, gentlemen. Think about what you're choosing. He rode out of camp at a leisurely pace, a man who knew the outcome was already decided. The council fire burned down to coals while the warriors made their preparations, weapons cleaned, horses readied, prayers offered to spirits who might or might not be listening. Magdalena sat with her daughter, humming a lullaby her own mother had sung during the dark times. The baby slept peacefully, unaware that morning might bring the end of everything. Running Bear approached as the stars began to fade. There is still time to run. Where? Magdalena asked. How far do I have to go before I stop bringing death to people who show me kindness? The question hung in the air like smoke. Both of them knew the answer. Some curses followed you until they were paid in full. Dawn was coming, and with it, the reckoning that had been building since the moment Dutch garrison first saw profit in a woman's pain. Dawn broke gray and cold over the prairie. Magdalena had taught them everything she knew about cavalry tactics during the long night. How soldiers moved in formation, where they placed their sharpshooters when they were most vulnerable. The Comanche warriors listened and learned. They had been fighting the army for generations, but never with insight from someone who understood both worlds. Magdalena's knowledge became their weapon. Stonehawk positioned his best marksmen in the rocks above the narrow canyon. Running Bear led the mounted warriors to the flanking position. The women and children were already moving south toward the river, following paths that had been escape routes for countless generations. Dutch returned with the sunrise. 3 companies of cavalry spread across the prairie behind him like a blue tide. The howitzer cannons rolled forward on wheeled carriages, their bronze barrels gleaming in the morning light. He rode forward under his white flag again, close enough to shout, far enough to retreat if the shooting started early. Last chance, he called. One woman for all your lives. Running Bear emerged from the rocks. His war paint made him look like something carved from stone and anger. Come and take her. The battle began with arrows falling like deadly rain. Magdalena had taught them to target the artillery crews first. Men scattered from the cannons, as Comanche marksmen found their range. Dutch spurred his horse toward higher ground, trying to direct the scattered cavalry formations. A rifle shot from the rocks sent his hat spinning away. He wheeled his mount and galloped toward the main horse. The cavalry charged up the canyon in waves. Each assault broke against positioned defenders who knew every stone and shadow. Horses fell. Men scattered. The blue tide retreated again and again. but numbers told their story slowly. The Comanche were outnumbered 5-1. Every warrior lost could not be replaced. Every arrow spent brought them closer to defeat. Stone, Hawk fought beside Running Bear like they had never disagreed. Old rivalries meant nothing when survival was at stake. They moved together, covering each other's flanks, sharing ammunition and water and the grim knowledge that this might be their last battle. A cavalry bullet found Stonehawk as he reloaded behind a boulder. The impact spun him around, but he kept firing until his strength failed. Running Bear caught him as he fell. "Promise me," Stonehawk whispered. Blood frothed on his lips. "Take the people south. Take the woman. Get them to Mexico." Running Bear gripped his friend's hand. "I promise." Stonehawk's eyes found Magdalena among the rocks. "Tell her. This was not her fault, was never her fault." He died with his rifle still warm in his hands. The cavalry retreated as the sun reached its peak. Too many losses for too little gain. Dutch regrouped his scattered forces and prepared for another assault, but his confident smile had faded. During the lull, Running Bear gathered the surviving warriors. Fewer than half remained. The ammunition was nearly gone. Another charge would finish them. "We cannot hold," he said simply. "Time to follow the women south." The withdrawal began in silence. Warriors slipped away through hidden paths, carrying their wounded, leaving nothing for the cavalry to claim as victory. Dutch discovered the empty positions just as the sun began to set. His howl of rage echoed off the canyon walls. 3 months of planning, 200 soldiers, all of it for nothing. He found the trail south and followed it through the night. 6 months later, Magdalena sat beside the Rio Grande watching her daughter sleep in the shade of a cottonwood tree. The Comanche camp stretched along the riverbank, lodges reflected in slow-moving water. Mexico had offered sanctuary of a sort. The government turned a blind eye to displaced tribes as long as they caused no trouble. It was not home, but it was peace. Running Bear approached with news from the trading post. His face had aged years in the months since the canyon battle. Command sat heavy on shoulders that had already carried too much grief. "Dutch is dead," he said. "Killed by other bounty hunters. They fought over the reward money." Magdalena absorbed this information without expression. She had stopped believing in justice long ago. Sometimes evil men died, sometimes they prospered. The world made no promises about fairness. "You are free now," Running Bear continued. "No more bounty, no more running." She looked at her daughter, who would grow up speaking Comanche and Spanish and English, a child of 3 worlds belonging fully to none, like her mother had always been. "What will you do?" Running Bear asked. Magdalena considered the question. She could return to the white settlements now. Find work in some frontier town. Raise her daughter among people who looked like her, but the Comanche had bled for her. Stonehawk had died defending her right to exist. Running Bear had kept his promise, bringing them all safely across the border. Freedom was not about choosing a world. It was about choosing what you were willing to sacrifice for the people who mattered. She looked at Running Bear's weathered face, saw the hope he was trying to hide, the question he was afraid to ask. Her daughter stirred in the cradleboard, making soft sounds that might become words someday. Words in languages that bridged worlds and built understanding between strangers. The river moved past them toward the Gulf of Mexico, carrying stories and secrets in the dreams of people who had learned that home was not a place but a choice. Magdalena had spent her life running from the consequences of other people's decisions. Time to live with the consequences of her own. She handed him the baby and walked toward the river. The water was cool against her hands as she washed the dust from her face. Behind her, she could hear Running Bear humming a Comanche lullaby to her daughter. The sound mixed with evening bird song and the quiet conversations of people making camp for another night of safety. When she turned back, Running Bear was watching her with the patience of a man who understood that some decisions took time. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, Click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.